Digitel is one of the leading companies helping associations leverage their content through event live streaming, webinars, and knowledge distribution. Take advantage of their 32 years of streaming success in generating revenue for their clients than any other company, hands down. For more information on Digitel, go to digitelinc.com.
Are you a follower?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna be at
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Executive Editor Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, how are you today?
Terrific. And today on GatherGeeks, we are focusing on planning internal company events. We have guests from two tech companies, which is an industry where events have a huge role in the competition for human resources. As one of our interviewees says, the war on talent is huge. At a certain point, you can't keep throwing cash because everyone can do that. So that's a great jumping off point for this discussion. And first up is Edward Perotti. And you spoke with him at BizBash's Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Los Angeles, where he was an honoree that night.
Yeah, no, I was really, with both of these guys that we're talking to today, the newfound respect for internal events is, frankly, what I would call awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ed is a great one to talk to for this. He's Senior Director of Global Meetings, Events, and Travel at VMware. He has been there for more than 10 years and has more than 25 years of creating events for clients in the high-tech, corporate, nonprofit, and government arenas. And, you know, David, this is such a hot area of events, and some companies really seem to get that with buy-in from the C-suite on down.
What's amazing to me is that there is a definitely relationship between hosting great internal events for your teams and the stock price. That is kind of a secret sauce that people don't realize. And I think we're learning it through these two interviews, the power of that.
Right. So let's take a listen.
Tell us what you do.
So I am a corporate event and meeting planner. So we manage close to 2,100 events a year around the world. And that's within the corporation. There's other, obviously.
And VMware, like, people don't realize what a big deal that
We're the biggest company nobody knows about. So we are, contrary to what the competition might say, we are the cloud. We actually came out of a graduate school project in Stanford.
You're the cloud.
We are the cloud. Virtual came out of us.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool. When I started, we were a little over 3,000 employees, and now we're close to 20,000 worldwide.
Wow. Go into your role and then go into this idea that you had over the summer.
So my role with VMware is I manage and own all employee events worldwide. So anything that touches an employee, which ties back to the culture, which ties back to the content, comes to my group.
And the rise of the employee event is now like the hottest thing going.
It is the hottest. It's actually, I should watch how I word this, but we have now made Fortune's top 100 or in the 40s for 3 years in a row. And what comes out of the survey is the employee experience and the events and the culture of the company.
Really?
So my group kind of walks around a little bit cocky.
So you're adding shareholder value in
Completely.
the biggest possible way.
Completely. It's not about making a party pretty. It's
Of course
about
not.
an experience.
And what's the secret sauce?
Secret sauce is knowing your culture, and secret sauce is having a voice.
But you helped develop this culture.
Yeah.
And what was that like? I mean, how did you sort of convince all the C-level people that besides your wonderful personality and your ability to sort of communicate?
It wasn't a convincing. It was more of sitting in the room with them, which is part of, I think, what most of our peers don't realize, is that you sit in every room in every meeting. So if you just
That's an event?
If you sit back and you listen,
Yeah.
and you watch the chessboard,
Yeah.
you see how things are playing out. So, and at that point, you either do what they want or you develop your own voice and stand up and just go for it and say, you know what, this is what I hear you saying and this is what I hear you wanting. So let me show you how to bring everyone together.
But how do you whisper that? How are you the
You
horse
don't
whisperer?
whisper it.
What do you do?
You just do it.
You just do it. Okay. Everyone who's listening has corporate overlords in some way. Mm-hmm. How do you get from the idea of here's an idea I want to present to actually making it happen? Like, what is your secret to doing that?
It's confidence, having the ability to be able to dream it up and cost it out of my head before I even blurt out the idea.
And so you're an idea guy on your feet.
On my feet.
Is that a key attribute of success in this business?
Without it sounding arrogant, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do think that because we're in the world of Murphy's Law. Everything is going to happen. You have to know exactly, if I do this, this will happen. But then if I do this, that'll happen. You have to be ready for everything so that when it does happen, you're not sweating, you're just moving, and everyone thinks that you have it all under control.
Okay, so let's go back to the idea that you did for your group that we talked about.
So we
paint the picture.
We had a leadership program, and it was going to be held in a convention center expo hall. Not exactly the most warm of environments. We walked in there, and all I saw was this massive expo hall with 50-foot ceilings, cement floors, and union labor. And that was it.
You saw expensive.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there was definitely dollar signs. And I sat down in the middle of the expo hall, and I just started going through my notes. And the staff is all in the back saying, "Just leave him alone. He'll come out when he's ready." And my notes from the content development kept saying, breaking silos, conversation, getting people to be engaged, but bringing people together. And I'm on the cement floor, and my rear is getting cold. And I just kept focusing on the floor. And next thing that popped in my head was, okay, conversation. Where do you have conversations? Well, most people have their best conversations in a kitchen or a living room. Like, okay, let's riff on that. Keep in mind, in my head, I've got 5 different voices going at one time. They're all arguing. And next thing I know, I'm thinking, well, what if we actually made the stage set look like a 1960s Eichler house? Total Dick Van Dyke set feel. Because the conversations would have been stronger in the 50s and 60s because the television wasn't such a big presence. So when you were in a living room, you had a conversation. And then backing it out to taking the entire expo hall and setting up 8 different complete living room sets for the audience to sit in. And then back it up further. So when they walked in the expo hall, they walked into a front yard of someone's home. Literally, the breaks were set up, the trees were there, the birds were chirping, the mailbox was set up, the lamppost, and then there were 8 front doors. And when it was ready to start, you heard 8 different doorbells going. The executive staff opened the doors, welcomed everyone in to the living room, and everybody sat there in the living room and had a frank conversation. People were coming in through the front door, leaving the stage, the fireplace was going. It was, how do you make something intimate for 700 people, right? And it was intimate, and then of course I decided to have a little tongue in cheek and bring the 50s, 60s TV show theme songs for everyone's walk-in. Our CFO, who was very clean cut, walked into Mr. Rogers, which I got in trouble for. But and I have a bit of a challenge with everybody pushing the new and modern and all this event experience when our core job, no matter if it's an event, if it's a party, if it's a wedding, is about bringing people together, period. And it's about a positive side of bringing people together, right? You either want them to walk away with a positive feeling of the business, the couple, the host, whatever it is. So you've got to look at it end to end, right? But you also want them stepping back and saying, that was really cool, that was really different, and they gave it to me. No one else did, but it tied right back to the business as that was the most positive experience for an event.
Well, and then you said that the number one reason for shareholder value increases.
It does, because retention, right? It's for what I do and how I look at it is everything is about retaining and attracting employees, partners, customers. Right? There's a battle
so
out there for talent.
So is the culture about, is it fun and it's getting, how do you describe the culture that you created?
It's interesting I would say the culture is very academic by its nature, which makes what I do a complete different facet. Right? They're very academic in how they think. It's very technical. It's very much about code and research and development. And then in comes Ed, who likes to throw them off their game and make them, I joke that dress down Fridays is pajamas in technology. And you just go in there and you give them something that they're not used to. And they gravitate towards it, right? Because not everybody is connected to academics. Not everyone's connected to the arts. Not everyone's connected to athletics. You have to give them everything in order to...
So also, I guess you have a challenge because you have people that are maybe socially awkward.
Oh, they're the fun ones.
And how do you? And is that one of the reasons you're doing this? I learned that design of events and things like that is to set cues to allow people to talk to each other in an more easily friendly way.
Yep. Well, and for us, little things that I started seeing. So in June. It's been 10 years since I've been with VMware. And one thing for us, food is really important. Art is really important to us. So I riffed on those to start with just to get people to relax. Right now, I've created a bit of a monster. They actually have a really educated palate.
A foodie culture?
Oh, Lord, I'm in trouble sometimes.
You can't cut the budget now.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, no coffee for you. But it is it's fun because they don't know what to expect, and being able to weave in the events and you've seen them with where we're bringing the A-listers from Hollywood down for my version of an actor studio conversation on campus, right? I've taken it to India, I've taken it to Cork, Ireland, bringing different academic speakers on, bringing concerts onto campus, and having Ariana Grande or Jason Derulo or Nick Jonas show up for our Halloween party. Our Halloween party last year on campus had over 10,000 people.
Wow!
Right, and it's just, but they're experiences that once again tie back positively to the business. You get them thinking that, and they're good.
I'm noticing places like Adobe and people like that, they're all really focusing on internal events.
Well, because the war on talent's huge.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you can't keep throwing cash. You can't keep throwing, because everyone can do that, right?
Right.
So you have to give them something. You want them there.
But it's a sustained program. It's not a one-hit wonder.
Well, and that's where everybody misses the boat.
So that's the advice that you give to other people
when you
doing
look at
internal.
an Adobe and you look at, and they're going to hunt me down if they see this.
Uh-oh.
But when you look at an Adobe or an Apple or a Google, they do phenomenal events, but they're all siloed off, right? When we do them, what I've been able to create is a red thread through everything, right? So it's not just R&D looks like this and sales looks like this and partners and customers look like this. There is a red thread of a soul of the company through everything we do.
Yeah.
And with the control and with the budgets and being able to do that, they're experiencing the company, right? Not just one department or one business unit.
Yes.
And it also, the leveraging on cost, the leveraging on all those things, because you're able to control it.
Yep. Okay, we have two last questions.
Yes.
One is, what advice would you give to the 21-year-old you?
Run.
Run.
The 21-year-old me, I would say start when I was 21, because I fell into this.
Yeah.
July is 25 years of me doing this. Do the math. We know that I didn't start when I was 21. Preserved. We'll just leave that alone.
Uh-huh.
I would say to not be afraid. I really, it's to not look for the brass ring the minute you walk out the gate, to be able to put the time in, but to develop this and this.
You're pointing to your head and your heart
My head
on radio.
and my heart. Sorry, yeah. Is to get your head and your heart and get those together, but also to experience the world.
Yeah.
Because you can't develop programs and you can't think creatively if you haven't seen anything.
So what advice do you give to someone that wants to be you now?
My family would say don't.
Of course. But like the person that's looking up and they want to do what you're doing, how do they train for that?
You can't train for it. You really can't. I'm a firm believer that you either have it in you.
It's a talent?
It's a talent. There's something, I can teach you the job, but I can't teach you that internal people skill and that internal creativity and that internal just guts to just jump off a cliff and hope the parachute's going to open.
Yeah.
But I can teach you numbers. I can teach you budgets.
Yeah.
But you either have that guttural where I'm good and
But when you hire someone, is it a blink thing?
So I do something when I hire somebody that drives my HR team nuts.
Okay.
Is I actually,
Confess.
after all the interviews, because we put people through about 4 or 5, and at the end of it, I circle back with them and I'm like, so you've now spent an entire day or 2 days or 3 days, whatever it is, hearing everything about the company, about what we do. I want you to go home, and there is no right or wrong answer, but I want you to put, because I'm big on mood boards for events, I want you to put together a mood board of how you see the company, the group, what we bring to the table, all of it. And there's no right or wrong, but I want to see because pictures usually tell what they're thinking. And most people are really good when they interview of choosing the right words. You can't lie with visuals.
That's so interesting.
So I have everybody submit to me a mood board, and I get a really good sense on how creative they are, how scared they are. Are they telling me what they think what I want to hear? And I generally weed people out really fast.
So you look at the mood board and that...
The mood board is usually what gets them the job or doesn't get them the job.
Yeah, no matter what they said.
No matter what they said.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you so much. I hope you don't get called by HR.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be the first.
Thanks, David. That was a really interesting conversation with Ed.
Yeah, no, I really found that he is totally respected in his company, especially with the C-suite people. They really depend on the things that he does.
Right, absolutely. And as you heard, these aren't small events. This isn't just a couple of events.
No.
They take this very seriously.
Yeah, they take this seriously, and this is, I believe this is the future.
So next up, we're going to hear from Damon Guidry. He is global event strategist at Adobe, and his portfolio of events includes gatherings of as many 10,000 guests, and they're all based on a philosophy of encouraging diversity and inclusion. Adobe is shattering the cliche of the kegs on the floor, bro tech culture of internal events, and they're hosting family events. They're encouraging clubs driven by employee interests and focusing on engaging employees through big and small events. David, what was your big takeaway from this conversation?
Well, I was really surprised on how diversity is what they really believe. And they believe that through diversity, this company is going to be even better and greater than ever before.
Great. Okay, well, let's hear from Damon.
So, Damon, you work at Adobe, and you're in charge of internal events. What does that mean in today's world?
So I think in today's world, really what we're looking at, what's really top of mind, especially for Adobe, is inclusion. So there's the diversity piece, which, are the people. But then what happens to employees when they actually come to work here? What kinds of experiences are we creating for them that are relevant to them, that are personal to them, that attract new talent and help retain talent? So really what we're looking for is that thing that people really connect to and they feel motivated by and feel engaged with.
So what is the answer to that? Like, what do you find is the secret sauce?
Yeah. To be more specific, what it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean beer bashes. When I first started working here, we used to put tubs out on the floor and fill them up with ice, typical sort of stereotypical ideas around what people have around tech companies with kegs on the floor and that sort of thing, that sort of bro tech culture. What we're talking about is taking that to a completely different place, where we're actually getting our employees involved and engaged in what we do. So, for example, we have an event currently happening right now in our New York office that's driven by employees, and it's a wall where people are going up to this wall and they're actually posting notes about what makes them happy, their motivational notes, their comments about diversity and inclusion, and it's also related to this political climate that we're in. So we're not necessarily endorsing anything, but we are allowing employees to express themselves on this inclusion wall.
So when you say an event now, you're kind of meaning an activation in marketing terms too, right?
Exactly.
And so is that what's different?
Yeah, I would say so. And I would also say one of the things that's different is that we're looking, because we need to scale. So we have, 60 offices in 40 countries.
And how many employees do you have now?
So we're somewhere around 16,000 last time I checked.
And I guess the problem is keeping and retaining people and attracting is part of the reason you're doing this, I assume?
So our company is growing very quickly, and one of the things that we need to do is we need to hire. And so events are a mechanism that we use to attract people to come work here. So we have a couple of hashtags that we use in our activations. One is hashtag Adobe Life, which you probably have seen. We actually have a new one called hashtag Adobe for All, which again ties back to this idea of inclusion and diversity.
Give us a little bit of a sense of how important internal events are to your culture, and does the C-level believe in them and for real?
Well, I think for Adobe, what happens is here's sort of the traditional way that people work. People come into work, they come into a building, they sit down at their desk, they sit there all day, they go out to lunch, they have some meetings, they go back to their desk, they go home. What we're finding is that our employees are expecting an experience in the workplace. So it's not just events, it's food, it's the wellness programs. There are certain types of benefits that are available to employees. So events actually are just a part of a larger strategy to help engage employees more in the workplace and make their jobs and the places where they work a more interesting place to be.
And how do you make them so that they are interesting? You don't want to get to the point where you're like running the class reunion and everybody, rolls their eyes and things like that. How do you make internal events really cool so that it becomes more than just being a patriot for your company?
So I think that there's two things. I think one is having a very clear vision about what your goals are, what your goals and objectives are around events. So, for Adobe, we know that we're very pro-family, so we try to do events throughout the season, throughout the year that attract, families. We know that that's a big thing. We also, again, diversity and inclusion is key. So we do a lot of things around what we call communities. So for example, if you're somebody who likes to knit, there's a knitting club. If you're somebody who likes to cycle, we have a cycling club. And those are employee-driven activities, and they create their own events. So they get funding to go out and do those activities that they like to do.
You as a company fund them.
That's right.
That's interesting.
And so there's an employee component here. It's not just a prescriptive thing that comes from leadership. We're allowing employees to determine what activities and events they want to drive. And then finally, there is that, I think I said two, but actually there's three. So the third piece, again, is really this diversity piece. I can't emphasize enough to you how important that is to Adobe. Because in order for us to fulfill our goals and objectives as a company, as we grow, we need to make sure that we're reflective of the communities that are around us. And so that means that we need to embrace, Black and brown people, LGBTQ, women, et cetera, et cetera. And, the tech industry hasn't always done a great job at doing that. And that's definitely where Adobe wants to be in.
When you say they haven't done a great job of doing that, is that because of blinders on, or that they don't realize that the power of diversity? Is it a shift in attitude?
Well, I can't really get into, or I don't have enough information to really kind of get into the historical, how we landed where we are right now. All I can say is that Adobe is aware, and I think everybody in Silicon Valley is aware. I mean, how can you not be aware that it is a very white, male-dominated environment? And so Adobe is doing everything that it can to shift that as much as we can. And events are one mechanism that we use to help accomplish those goals.
What's a typical event that solves the diversity issue for you?
It can go from anything from, say, for example, a food event. Like, for example, for Black History Month, we had a North American food contest where African-American employees submitted their favorite recipes. Those were submitted to our chefs. We have 4 cafes. Actually, we have more than 4, but we have 4 sites in North America that have cafes. And those chefs looked at those recipes and decided which one would be the winner. And then those selected recipes were actually served to our employees. And then, there's signage and communications that went out to say that, these things are being served. We had African-American celebrations, Black History Month celebrations in our offices. We had guest speakers come in. We did volunteer activities where our employees went out to the community and donated time and energy to support the local community. So there's all sorts of things that happen, and we repeat these throughout the year around different events, for example, like Pride. We'll be marching in Pride in San Francisco, Salt Lake City, New York, Ottawa, and Seattle this year. So our contingents, will have parade floats, and they'll be marching, and we'll do design around that, around our brand. But most importantly, to help get our employees out there and engage in ways that they feel is meaningful to them.
And you're going to help fund these activities, right?
Absolutely. So all these activities are funded by Adobe.
And how does that get put into the budget in terms of, how do you figure out what's more important than another thing?
So that's a really good question. So each one of our sites actually has a site council. Wow. And the site councils are given funding from corporate to plan out their calendar year for events. 15% of that site council budget at each site is earmarked specifically for diversity and inclusion events. And each site council has a diversity champion on the council who oversees that funding. And then those diversity champions are overseeing the employee networks at each one of the sites. So, for example, Black Employee Network will say, hey, in our site here in San Francisco, we want to have a speaker come in and talk about the history of Black music in America. So we had a person come in who was a songwriter from Motown, actually, who came into our office and gave a lecture about working with the Motown record label. So that's how we drive that. It is definitely something that comes from the bottom up, and we hand it to the employees and we let the employees drive.
So these councils, they're self-directed, but who are the people that step up to be leaders? What are the personality types, or is there a specific personality type?
Typically what we have on our site councils are, managers that oversee different BUs. We also have our site operations manager. And then we have people who report to, well, some of the folks are C-level, but they also report to folks in San Jose, our corporate headquarters as well. But generally speaking, the people that are actually executing these events are generally not managers. These are just regular employees who are motivated and driven to be activated.
And do they love it? I mean, it sounds like, when we do it in our company, it's some sort of special sauce that happens that you can't quite explain. Do you see the same thing?
Everybody loves an event. And I think when you are passionate about something, I think that's the thing, is making sure that you've got the right mix of things that are attractive to people. So that when you're passionate about something, you don't really think about how difficult or how challenging it might be. You do it because you really have an interest in it. And I think that's, again, that key is it's diversity, but then on top of that, it's inclusion. So when people come on board, you want to make sure that you've got, that they have a voice at the table and that they're able to bring things to the table that they're interested in doing and that they like. So for example, tell me something that you're interested in. Besides events. I know
besides events, I'm politics.
Okay. So let's say that you came to work at Adobe and you're interested in politics. Now, Adobe's not going to necessarily endorse any particular political party, but if you wanted to have, say, a debate club, right, and you want to debate politics or something, that might be something that Adobe might be willing to do. So you could say, okay, I'm really interested in this, and there's a couple of other folks here at Adobe that, we sit down and we talk about this stuff over coffee. We actually want to form like a club, an organized club, where we can get together and we can debate politics, have coffee, maybe play a few games or something like that. That is something that we could possibly look at and say, we can build small events around this. We're not talking about, an event with 2,000 people, but we're talking about a cadence of meetings with this particular club just for fun that has nothing to do with work, where you and your colleagues get to cultivate an activity or a passion that you enjoy.
That's so interesting. Now, how do you deal with it from a structural level in your role? Are you involved? How does the company organize around this? Where do the champions come from?
Yeah, so my role, I'm not a planner. I originally started out as a planner, but my role now is more strategist. So what happens is we have a lot of initiatives that are coming from the top. So again, you keep hearing me talk about diversity and inclusion. So this is a broader initiative across Adobe. My job is to figure out how do we take that initiative, these broader company goals, and funnel them down into a way that makes sense as activities at a site level. So if I'm in New York and I'm looking at our office there, which is obviously much smaller than our San Jose office, how can we engage employees around the whole diversity and inclusion question in that office? So that's one of the reasons why we have this wall where people can walk up to this wall and they can put Post-its up. It's on display. Anybody can see it. A customer can see it. Whoever can see it. At a larger site where there's more funding and we have more infrastructure to be able to support things, we can do things like a Motown speaker. And that was employee driven. That was actually a relative of an employee. And this employee said, hey, this person's one of my relatives. I can bring them in. And we supported that.
So dig a little deeper in terms of how, from your role, how do you actually? You say you're supposed to bring it down to the unit level or to the location level. How do you do that? I mean, what is your job to actually get that done?
It really depends. If we're talking about an initiative, for example, we have an event called Adobe Field Trip, which is actually an initiative, and that's actually funded through corporate dollars. So that's our essentially, for lack of a better way to explain it, it's our bring your kid to work day event. It's family day. That is something that we actually design and drive from our end. So that's more of a planner role. I do less and less of that type of work. So that's sort of your traditional, we design it, we execute it, we deliver it type of scenario. With the other framework, with the site council framework, It really is up to the site councils to determine.
So it's a distributed model.
What works in Utah is not going
Right.
to necessarily work in Bangalore.
Is that what your colleagues are telling you in other companies? That the distributed model is kind of the way to go in terms of the importance of events?
No, I'm not hearing this actually.
This is unique to you guys.
This, as far as I know, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the site council structure. I don't know of any other companies that have site councils.
And is that something that you've evolved over the years, I guess? I mean, some light bulb went off and said, let's do it this way?
Yeah, for sure. Because, if you think about funding and how sites are funded, typically there's a BU or an organization that dominates a site. And so sometimes that can create some inequalities, depending on who's sitting there and how generous they are. So the site councils help level the playing field, so to speak.
And in general, though, let's go a little bit into the broader strategy of employee events in general in corporate America. Is this, I kind of view this as like the latest trend where people used to think of this as an afterthought, like the beer in the hallway, to a really important strategic move now. Are you seeing that among your colleagues?
Definitely.
What are some examples that you see?
Well, I can't really speak for other companies, but I can speak for Adobe. Again, you say beer and hall. It literally was what was happening when I started here. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
I think at the end of the day, if people are happy and they're engaged, I think that's really what we're aiming for. But I think the difference between then and now for Adobe is that everything that we do, we try to do it with a purpose. The first question is, what is the story that we're trying to tell? What is the problem that we're trying to solve for? What outcomes do we want to see from this initiative or this event or this activity that we're promoting? And if it doesn't make sense, if there's no real business case for it, then it probably doesn't make sense for us to do it.
So go back to what I guess the natural question is, what's the most popular business case? What's the story that you're trying to solve? What are you trying to solve for most commonly now from your view?
Yeah, I think really the big thing that we're trying to solve for right now on today, this could change a year from now or 2 years from now, whatever. I think the big thing we're trying to solve for, again, is diversity and inclusion.
That's your number one.
Yes.
And as opposed to general recruitment, right? General recruitment is not one of them.
That's right. And making sure that we have a diverse workforce. But, I always want to emphasize the inclusion part because that's where I come in. I don't hire. Our events team, we have our team, but what I'm saying is we're not recruiters. We're not the ones that are actually going out there, going to the universities, interviewing students and working through that pipeline to bring people into Adobe. Our job is to engage employees once they're here. So that's why I keep emphasizing the inclusion part, because really what my job is to make sure that there's a voice for every employee that works at Adobe through the events that we do.
But I'm assuming that the amplification of that voice has a result on the recruiting side because they say, hey, look at the cool things we're doing at Adobe. I'm going to try to work there.
Well, of course. So if I'm a recruiter, it's actually useful for me to be able to say, hey, look at all these really great activities that we do at Adobe. So that's true, yes.
We've had these conversations in the past that Adobe isn't a last year's startup. And so you had to completely sort of reinvent yourself as you got, I don't know how old you are right now, but you've got to continually reinvent, right?
Yeah, that's true. And as we grow, we're growing very rapidly, and the company's doing extraordinarily well at the moment. As we reap the benefits of that success, we also have to look towards the future and move very, very, very quickly as we adapt and change.
So if you put your crystal ball hat on, what is the future going to be for employee events going forward?
I would say that data is probably going to be the big game changer. What I'm seeing from my end, and I'm also hearing this around, and I'm sure other people have heard it as well, there's that business case where we're kind of creeping into that territory, but then how do you prove it?
Right.
And so we need more data.
And how do you guys do that?
Well, we don't.
Oh, you don't. So this is the challenge of the future.
That is the challenge of the future. And you and I talked about, how do we kind of figure out, what things to measure? And we know that conversations are important. So, that measure of 3 to 4 conversations,
Right.
per event, per person kind of gives us some metric to kind of show to leadership, like, hey, this is really great because had we not done this event or had this group not met together or had these conversations, there'd be less interactions. And so we want to promote interactions. So that's good. So I think that's just the beginning. But we've got to crack that nut and figure out how to really prove with numbers that these things are actually beneficial to employees and to companies.
Do you think that the C-level people, the top-level people that used to sort of think events are nice to haves, are thinking that they're need to haves, even though without the solid proof?
Absolutely.
And what makes
there wouldn't be funding. There wouldn't be funding for site councils, and there wouldn't be this whole strategy if they didn't believe that.
Do you think that's based on the leadership that's coming into these companies now that are a little bit more forward-thinking?
I think so to a certain extent. I mean, our CEO has been around for a while, and our leadership has been in place for, some time. I think that part of it, though, to your point, I think part of it, though, is our acquisitions. So Adobe, like a lot of tech companies, has grown through acquisitions. And each time, we add new employees that way, add 300-400 employees, there's a lot of new blood that comes into the company. And little by little, they sort of shift the culture in a positive way. And so they're bringing new things to the table that maybe Adobe wouldn't have if we hadn't acquired them. Now, this is just me, talking, but from my own observation, I see a shift and change in energy when you have this influx of people come into an office that weren't there before. And typically, they're going to be younger, and maybe it was a startup. Most likely it was. So there's going to be a different kind of atmosphere and flavor that they bring to the environment, to the culture.
Have you noticed that there is a connection between the DNA of your marketing events and your other outbound events and your internal events? Is there sort of a similar, like, I'm so proud to go to an Adobe event as a customer, that it melts into the internal approach?
That's a great question. So about a little over a year ago, what we ended up doing was we merged 2 different entities. So our customer experience team merged together with our employee experience team. So now we're beginning to see a connection between the two. So previously they were separated. Now they're actually together. So a lot of the things that we're actually driving across both entities. So again, going back to diversity and inclusion, you can't have that conversation about diversity and inclusion just in employee events. That actually goes to your marketing side as well.
Because you have all those people marketing Adobe without being paid to market Adobe.
That's right. And so what happens to our customers? What's their experience like? And so we want Adobe to be as good of a company to work with in terms of being a customer as it is to work for.
Not to mention that you've got 16,000 built-in influencers in the world of influencer marketing.
That's right.
So it all morphs. We're saying that the world is morphing together, and we're in kind of the festivalization of events where there's no such thing as one type of event, but it's all types of events morphing together to get that same feeling of people connecting.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We went to Dreamforce last year just to kind of scope it out and get some ideas and sort of see, because we're in this Adobe bubble, so we wanted to go out and kind of see what was going on. And it was mind-blowing, the storytelling, the types of engagement that they used, the way that they had their presentation set up. There's just this big floor with all this activity going on simultaneously. And some of those things, we're trying to incorporate into our employee events. Obviously we don't have those kinds of budgets with what we do because they're site-driven, but we're taking those things and we're incorporating them into the way that we engage our employees.
Help our listeners understand. So you went to Dreamforce, and you don't have the budget theoretically to do what they did. But what are the takeaways that you do have? What would you steal from them that's a universal concept in your events?
I think storytelling is really key. They did an excellent job of storytelling, and I think that's what event goers or participants expect when they go to an event nowadays. They want a clear understanding of why they're there and what it is, and they want help being guided through that experience. So I think telling a story is key. Another thing that we learned from that are just certain types of activations that I think resonate with people today. Wellness and well-being are big topics now. So they have this really awesome, I don't know what you call it, but this sort of tent, and they had monks inside, and you could meditate, and they had relaxation areas where you could just hang out on a hammock, massage therapy. But it was all done in this really wonderful way that told the story about being outdoors and sort of in a going on a trail through the forest. So just key points like that resonate with people today around just being healthy and well-being. I don't know.
That sounds remarkable. And you're actually implementing some of that stuff?
Oh, for sure. So we actually have a well-being coordinator who sits on my team, by the way. And we're actually working with her on a number of programs in the Bay Area and across Adobe this year. So we're doing our first Walk to Work Day experience this year. And what that will be is obviously it's a connection to wellness and well-being, obviously, because you're walking. But more importantly, it's a commute alternative. So our office here in San Francisco is in South of Market. We're actually expanding. We have a new office going in about a block from here, but we're not adding any parking. So we really want to encourage our employees to find alternate ways to get to the office, get to and from the office. And walking, obviously, is one of those ways, and using public transportation. So that's an activation that we're looking to do. We're really excited about doing it.
I mean, you're obviously changing the culture by doing these kind of things.
Well, that's true.
And that's
and you know, kind of jumping over to Adobe Field Trip, which is, again, the kids' activity. You know, some of the things that we saw at Dreamforce, we feel would be great for children.
Really?
Yeah. You know, why not have a chill out space?
Yeah.
Where kids can meditate. You know, if you're an 8, 9, 10, 12-year-old, why not go in and learn how to do some relaxation exercises?
Do you think any of these sort of events stimulate the product development guys on your own products? Does it have an impact, do you think, in terms of UX and things like that? In a direct, maybe it's just my thinking, but it sounds like if that's the way you look at the world, you're changing how developers think about things as well.
I think it's possible. I think I can tell you for certain, the work that we're doing is making Adobe a great place to work. So if I'm a developer, if I'm an engineer, you know, whatever it is that I'm doing at Adobe, if I can take some time out and do something that really is meaningful to me and have a connection to other people at Adobe who share similar activities or ideas or things that they like or enjoy, that's going to help my work because I don't feel isolated. I don't feel disconnected. There's a community for me at my workplace. And as you become a larger and larger company, it's much harder, I think, for people to connect. Mm-hmm. So for sure, I think the work that we're doing is helping to bring people together in that regard.
Let me close on the note of, I'm noticing that there is the world of the temporary marketplace and the world of the temporary workplace, where you're seeing venues creating an office for a month, for example, and bringing people from around the world together. Do you guys experience any of that type of thinking? Do you do that kind of thing?
So we actually have an experience lab space that we're testing out all sorts of kind of fun things in terms of workplace design. Can't really speak too much about that, and I'm not really sure how events will play into that. But yeah, there is some of that happening at Adobe.
Yeah, no, I think that's a trend that's happening where you actually actually working together as an event because the people are all around the world, and they get together and they have a temporary office that's temporarily set up with all the Adobe culture pieces or whatever culture it is, and they work together for a month and then they disband, and it becomes this innovation hub that's pretty remarkable, actually.
Yeah, we haven't done anything like that yet, and as far as I know, there isn't anything like that. Although I do wonder, you know, once we sort of figure out, okay, here's what's happening in this site, here's what's happening in this site, and we've built all these different communities, then how do we connect those communities across sites like what you're saying? Mm-hmm. So, for example, if I'm somebody who's, let's just say Black Employee Network, right? So you've got, employees in the Bay Area who are in the Black Employee Network, but then there may be employees in Europe who want to be a part of that community. How do we bridge that gap and bring them into the community, even though they're sitting in another continent?
So that looks like the next frontier.
I would say so.
Great.
For sure.
So thank you so much, Damon. How can people get in touch with you if they want to sort of up their game in employee events and sort of think about the strategic way you're thinking about it?
Well, they can look me up on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile. It's Damon Guidry, so it's LinkedIn, DamonGuidry.
Great. Thank you so much, Damon. We'll look forward to further chats. Thanks so much.
So, David, that was fascinating. And a question that comes to mind is, are events driving company culture, or is the culture of the company driving events? What do you think?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that it's working together. They realize that events become the rallying cry for the corporate culture. And so the corporate culture is devised and designed using events as one of the key tactics.
Right. It's such a point of differentiation, too, among companies. So when you have these things to brag about, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's like when you go home at night and you talk to your spouse or your partner or whatever, it's usually these things about what happened in their office. And the fact that they're getting these sort of specialized groups together means that you're invested yourself in the success of these events.
Right, absolutely. One thing that was interesting is he identified the need for data, that internal events really do move the needle. And I think that's going to be a fertile ground for innovation and another way that planners can really prove their worth to a company.
I also think that what's interesting through BizBash is we're seeing a lot of these people who are doing internal events getting together and creating these aha moments between each other that they're using to justify improving their strategy internally, and it's spreading because you hear it from one company and then another company will start it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, great grounds for networking and sharing best practices.
I think as I said earlier, this is kind of the next frontier.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for bringing those two interviews to us. And I just wanted to share some of our internal news before we close off for this episode of GatherGeeks. This is my final chance to plug BizBash Live Florida. It's not too late to register for our event, which takes place Thursday, May 4th in Fort Lauderdale. We have a great lineup of speakers, a bustling exhibit hall, and lots of opportunities for networking. So I just wanted to tell our listeners out there, come join us. And if you can't make it to Florida, we have two other BizBash Live events this year. We'll be in Los Angeles on July 19th and in New York on October 25th.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. If you are looking for a state-of-the-art learning management system, take a look at Digitel's newest platform, OpusDX. OpusDX offers the robust platform for event organizers and associations to manage content. To learn more and schedule a demo, email them at contactus@digitelinc.com. That's contact us at digitellinc.com.